Welcome to Beyond 10, where we dive deeper than your average top 10 list. I'm Aiden Reese, and today we're exploring dark psychology, top 10 psychological experiments too unethical to repeat. Get ready for the most fascinating, bizarre, and mind-blowing facts about dark psychology. Let's begin. Number 10. Guatemala STD Studies. In 2010, the American public was shocked to learn that from 1946 to 1948, U.S. researchers had deliberately infected Guatemalan prisoners, mental patients, soldiers, and sex workers with syphilis and gonorrhea without their knowledge or consent. Unlike Tuskegee, where researchers merely observed naturally occurring infections, the Guatemala studies involved active infection. Researchers paid infected sex workers to have sex with prisoners, applied bacteria directly to abrasions they created on subjects' genitals, and injected bacteria into their spines. Approximately 1,300 Guatemalans were infected, including orphaned children, many of whom later died. The study's stated purpose was testing the effectiveness of penicillin in preventing sexually transmitted infections. What makes this experiment particularly disturbing is that it occurred immediately following the Nuremberg trials, where Nazi doctors were condemned for similar non-consensual experiments. The same researcher, Dr. John Cutler, who later participated in the Tuskegee experiments, led this study. When penicillin shortages limited treatment, researchers simply left their infected subjects untreated. The study was terminated in 1948 when funding dried up, but its results were never published. Its existence remained hidden until historian Susan Reverby discovered Cutler's papers in 2005. In 2010, President Obama personally apologized to Guatemala's president, calling the experiments clearly unethical. The studies represent one of history's clearest examples of researchers viewing foreign nationals, particularly those from developing countries, as disposable subjects for experiments too unethical to conduct on American citizens. Number 9. Operation Midnight Climax. Imagine being secretly drugged with LSD at a government-run brothel while CIA agents watch you through a one-way mirror. This wasn't the plot of a conspiracy thriller, but Operation Midnight Climax, one of MKUltra's most bizarre programs. Beginning in 1954, the CIA hired prostitutes to lure unsuspecting men to safe houses in San Francisco and New York, where they were given drinks laced with LSD and other mind-altering substances without their knowledge or consent. As the drugged men experienced hallucinations, disorientation, and panic, CIA operatives observed their reactions from behind one-way glass, seeking insights into potential mind control and interrogation techniques. The program expanded to include other experimental drugs, often administered in escalating doses to determine lethal limits. Some subjects experienced psychotic episodes lasting days, while others suffered lasting psychological damage. What makes this program particularly disturbing is its violation of citizens by their own government for dubious national security purposes. The operation became increasingly unhinged as its chief, George Hunter White, began personally dosing unwitting bar patrons, dinner guests, and strangers with LSD simply to observe their reactions. When the operation finally ended in 1965, White reflected in a chilling letter to his MKUltra supervisor. "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" Number 8. Pit of Despair, Harlow's Isolation Chambers. If creating the perfect environment for inducing severe depression was a scientific goal, Harry Harlow succeeded with his notorious Pit of Despair. Beginning in the early 1970s, Harlow separated infant monkeys from their mothers and placed them in V-shaped isolation chambers from which they could not escape or even stand upright. The chambers were designed to produce artificial depression through total isolation and physical restraint. After just 30 days, the animals showed profound psychological damage. They would sit huddled in corners, rocking and clutching themselves. When returned to normal monkey communities, they remained permanently damaged, unable to socialize, engage in play, or mate. Most disturbing was their self-destructive behavior. Some would tear out their own hair or mutilate their limbs through compulsive biting. Harlow himself described these experiments with unsettling detachment. Most subjects typically assume a hunched position in a corner of the bottom of the apparatus. One might presume at this point that they find their situation to be hopeless. What makes these experiments particularly disturbing is their deliberate cruelty. They were explicitly designed to create maximum psychological suffering in infant primates, creatures whose emotional needs closely mirror human children's. The experiments continued despite criticism from colleagues, including psychologist William Mason, who called them the most controversial ever conducted in psychology. These studies stand as perhaps the clearest example in scientific history of deliberately inducing severe, lasting trauma in vulnerable subjects for documentation purposes. Number 7. Tuskegee Syphilis Study. Perhaps the most infamous case of medical deception in American history, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study tracked the progression of untreated syphilis in 399 African American men under the guise of providing free health care. Beginning in 1932, U.S. Public Health Service researchers told the men, poor sharecroppers from Alabama, they were being treated for bad blood, when in fact they received no effective treatment at all. The true purpose was to document the natural progression of syphilis until autopsy. What makes this study particularly horrifying is its duration. It continued for 40 years until 1972, decades after penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis in 1947. Researchers actively prevented participants from accessing treatment, even providing lists of subjects to local doctors with instructions to deny them penicillin. The men suffered needlessly as syphilis destroyed their bodies: cardiovascular damage, neurological impairment, blindness, insanity, and death. Many unwittingly infected their wives, who gave birth to children with congenital syphilis. The study only ended when whistleblower Peter Buxton leaked details to the press, creating public outrage. What this experiment reveals about institutional racism in American healthcare has had lasting consequences. Many African Americans today cite Tuskegee when explaining their distrust of medical authorities. The study's legacy extends beyond its direct victims to influence healthcare disparities today, as it sowed deep suspicion of medical research and institutions that persists generations later. Number 6. Monkey drug addiction studies. In the 1960s, psychologist Harry Harlow conducted a series of experiments designed to create and study depression and addiction in rhesus monkeys that were so brutal even other researchers called them unethical and inhumane. Building on his earlier maternal deprivation studies, where infant monkeys were separated from their mothers and offered cloth or wire surrogates, Harlow designed what he called the Well of Despair, a stainless steel isolation chamber where monkeys were confined for up to 2 years. This forced isolation drove the animals insane. They engaged in self-mutilation and emerged in a state of severe psychosis. In his addiction studies, Harlow made monkeys dependent on alcohol and drugs, then monitored their behavior as they experienced withdrawal symptoms. In one particularly disturbing experiment, he created an apparatus where monkeys could self-administer morphine directly into their bloodstream. The monkeys became so addicted they would self-inject up to 200 times a day, foregoing food until they died from starvation. Harlow himself described his isolation chambers as a device that was technically elegant but essentially odious. What makes these experiments particularly disturbing is that they were designed specifically to induce extreme psychological suffering in primates with complex emotional lives similar to humans, solely to observe that suffering, often with limited scientific value. These studies represent one of psychology's most explicit examples of creating severe, prolonged trauma solely for observation, with little consideration for the subject's welfare or the experiment's scientific necessity. We're halfway through our countdown, and things are about to get even more incredible. If you're enjoying this journey through top 10 psychological experiments too unethical to repeat, make sure to hit subscribe and that notification bell so you never miss our weekly deep dives into the world's most fascinating subjects. Number 5. MK Ultra. Between 1953 and 1973, the CIA conducted a series of mind control experiments so extreme they sound like science fiction, except they were terrifyingly real. Project MK involved drugging unwitting American and Canadian citizens with LSD, performing electroshock therapy, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, verbal and sexual abuse, and various other methods of torture to attempt to develop mind control techniques and truth serums for interrogation. Many subjects were particularly vulnerable individuals, prisoners, terminal cancer patients, and sex workers who couldn't effectively consent. At McGill University, Dr. Ewan Cameron, later president of the American Psychiatric Association, destroyed patients' existing memories through drug-induced comas lasting up to 90 days, extreme electroshock treatments, and repetitive recordings played while they slept. Most victims emerged with permanent cognitive impairment and psychological trauma. When the program was finally exposed by the Church Committee in 1975, the CIA had already destroyed most documents, though enough survived to reveal the program's horrifying scope. What makes MK particularly disturbing is that it wasn't conducted by rogue scientists, but authorized at the highest levels of government and carried out by respected researchers at prestigious institutions, including Harvard and Stanford. The project represents not just unethical research, but a fundamental betrayal of the government's duty to protect its citizens, treating vulnerable Americans as disposable lab rats in dehumanizing experiments. Number 4. The Monster Study. Some psychological experiments earn their disturbing nicknames, and none more deservedly than the Monster Study. In 1939, speech pathologist Wendell Johnson and graduate student Mary Tudor set out to test whether stuttering was innate or could be induced through psychological pressure. Their subjects, 22 orphan children in Iowa, many already vulnerable due to abandonment and institutional living. The researchers divided the children into two groups. The control group received positive reinforcement for their speech, being told they spoke well. The experimental group, even those with perfectly normal speech, were repeatedly criticized, interrupted, and told they were developing stuttering problems. The results were devastating. Previously normal-speaking children in the experimental group developed speech problems, reading difficulties, and lasting psychological damage. Many became self-conscious and reluctant to speak at all. 5 of the 6 children who had been falsely labeled as stutterers developed lasting speech problems. Most disturbing was how the researchers abandoned these children without any attempt to undo the psychological damage they had inflicted. The study remained hidden until 2001, when the University of Iowa publicly apologized. 3 surviving participants received financial compensation, but most lived their entire lives with the artificial speech and psychological issues implanted during childhood. This horrific abuse of vulnerable orphans, conducted without consent or therapeutic intent, stands as one of psychology's darkest chapters: experimental child abuse masquerading as science. Number 3. Little Albert Experiment. In 1920, behaviorist John Watson set out to prove that emotional reactions could be classically conditioned in humans, just as Pavlov had done with dogs. His subject, a 9-month-old orphan known only as Albert B. Watson began by showing Albert a white rat, which initially caused no fear. Then, whenever the rat appeared, Watson would create a terrifying loud noise by striking a steel bar with a hammer behind the infant's head. After just 7 pairings, little Albert would burst into tears at the mere sight of the rat. Watson didn't stop there. He systematically conditioned Albert to fear similar white furry objects: rabbits, dogs, a sealskin coat, even a Santa Claus mask with white cotton balls. What makes this experiment particularly disturbing is that Watson made no attempt to decondition Albert before the baby was removed from the hospital. While some historians believe Albert died at age 6 from hydrocephalus, others have identified him as Douglas Merritt, who suffered from congenital hydrocephalus, meaning Watson may have knowingly experimented on a neurologically impaired child. The experiment's lasting horror lies not just in the deliberate traumatization of a baby, but in the complete disregard for Albert's long-term welfare. Today, intentionally inducing phobias in any child, let alone an orphaned infant possibly suffering from neurological issues, would be considered unconscionable psychological abuse rather than legitimate science. Number 2. Milgram Obedience Study. I was just following orders. This infamous defense of Nazi war criminals inspired Yale psychologist Stanley Milgram to design one of history's most revealing and disturbing experiments. Participants were told they were assisting in a study about learning and would administer increasingly powerful electric shocks to a learner, actually an actor, each time they answered questions incorrectly. As the learner began screaming in apparent agony and begging for the experiment to stop, a researcher in a lab coat simply instructed, "The experiment requires that you continue." The truly shocking result? Approximately 65% of participants administered what they believed were potentially lethal 450-volt shocks, despite hearing the victim's heart-rending pleas and eventual ominous silence. What made this experiment so profoundly disturbing was that it involved ordinary Americans, teachers, engineers, housewives, who had no history of violence or cruelty. When interviewed afterward, many participants were visibly distressed by their own actions, often shaking or sweating profusely. The experiment revealed that obedience to authority was not a uniquely German trait that explained Nazi atrocities, but a powerful human tendency that transcends culture and individual personality. While providing crucial insights into the psychological mechanisms behind humanity's darkest moments, the experiment inflicted significant psychological trauma on unwitting participants and could never be replicated under modern ethical standards. Number 1. Stanford Prison Experiment. In the summer of 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo transformed the basement of Stanford University into a mock prison and randomly assigned 24 psychologically healthy male students to roles as prisoners or guards. What began as an academic experiment quickly descended into a real-world nightmare. Within days, the guards, ordinary students with no previous tendencies toward cruelty, began subjecting prisoners to increasingly sadistic abuse. They forced prisoners to clean toilets with bare hands, sleep on concrete, and endure sexual humiliation, while denying them basic necessities like clothing and bathroom privileges. Most disturbing was how rapidly and completely the participants embraced their assigned roles. Several guards became genuinely cruel, while prisoners either rebelled violently or fell into severe depression. Planned for 2 weeks, Zimbardo terminated the experiment after just 6 days when his girlfriend visited and was horrified by what she witnessed. The experiment revealed something deeply unsettling about human nature. Ordinary people can quickly transform into monsters simply by being assigned a role and given institutional approval. While frequently cited in psychology textbooks, the experiment's methodology has been heavily criticized, and its lack of informed consent and psychological safeguards ensures it could never be conducted today. Despite these criticisms, the images of college students rapidly transforming into sadistic prison guards remain a disturbing testament to humanity's capacity for situational evil. And there you have it, the top 10 psychological experiments too unethical to repeat. Which one surprised you the most? Drop a comment below with your thoughts or suggestions for future topics you'd like us to explore. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and check out our other playlists covering everything from unexplained mysteries to music revolutionaries and unsettling technology. This is Beyond 10, where we don't just list facts, we uncover the extraordinary stories behind them. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the most interesting things in life deserve to be ranked.